It all started with a simple trip to the thrift store. The place was an old, dusty hole in the wall, the kind of store that looked like it hadn't seen a good cleaning in years. I was never much for socializing, so wandering through aisles of forgotten junk felt oddly comforting. It was the day before Halloween, and while my friends were out looking for last-minute costumes at the mall, I was content to rummage through discarded remnants of the past. That's when I saw it. The mask was hanging from a hook in the back of the store, partially hidden behind a rack of musty coats. It was intricately designed, almost like a piece of art. The face was porcelain white, with deep, hollow eyes and a mouth that curled into a sinister smile. Veins of gold and silver thread traced delicate patterns across its surface, and there was something about it that drew me in. Something that whispered in the back of my mind. It felt like it was meant for me. I took it down and examined it closely. The craftsmanship was impeccable, almost lifelike. It was cold to the touch, sending a shiver through my spine, but I couldn't bring myself to put it down. I don't know what came over me, but I knew I had to have it. The price tag was smudged, unreadable, but the old woman at the counter barely glanced at it before tossing it into a paper bag. She didn't say a word, just watched me with a strange look as I left the store. That night I decided to try it on. At first it felt heavy, like it didn't quite fit, but as I adjusted the straps, it seemed to mold to my face perfectly. The inside of the mask was lined with a soft, velvety material, but the moment it settled into place, I felt a rush of warmth, followed by a surge of confidence that I had never experienced before. It was as if the mask was alive, breathing into me a new persona. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the shy, awkward teenager who had always been afraid to speak up. Instead, I saw someone strong, fearless. I felt powerful, like I could do anything, be anyone. I didn't recognize the face staring back at me, but I liked it. No, I loved it. I decided to go out that night. The town was buzzing with Halloween spirit, and for the first time, I wanted to be a part of it. As I walked through the streets, people turned to look at me, but their gazes weren't of pity or mockery. They were of fear, admiration. I could feel their eyes on me, and it fed something inside, something dark and hungry. But as the night wore on, the mask began to feel different. The warmth I had felt earlier turned into a burning sensation. I tried to take it off, but the straps seemed to have fused together, like they were glued to my skin. Panic set in, but then that voice in the back of my mind whispered again, urging me to embrace it, to let go of my fear. And that's when it started. At first, it was just a small nudge, like a push from behind, guiding me through the crowd. But then the nudges became stronger, more insistent. I found myself walking into an alley, where a group of kids were hanging out, laughing and joking around. One of them bumped into me, spilling a drink on my shirt. The old me would have apologized, backed away, but with the mask on, I felt an uncontrollable rage bubble up inside. Before I knew what I was doing, I grabbed the kid by the throat and slammed him against the wall. His friends backed off, terrified. I could see the fear in his eyes as he struggled to breathe, and it thrilled me. I squeezed harder, watching as his face turned pale, his eyes bulging out of their sockets. Then I heard it, the sound of a crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. The kid went limp in my grasp, his body slumping to the ground. Blood trickled from his nose and mouth, pooling at my feet. For a moment I felt sick, horrified at what I had done, but then that voice whispered again, soothing me, telling me it was okay, that he deserved it. And I believed it. The mask was smiling. I tried to take it off again, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it had become a part of me, like it was digging into my skin. I could feel it pulsing, alive, feeding off my fear, my anger. I stumbled out of the alley, wiping the blood from my hands. I knew I had to get home, to get rid of the mask before it made me do something even worse. But as I walked, I could feel it growing stronger, its influence spreading through me like a virus. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. They were darker, twisted, filled with a desire for violence. I was losing control, becoming something I didn't recognize, something I feared. And deep down, I knew the mask wasn't going to come off. Not until it had finished what it started. The mask wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of the boy's lifeless face, his eyes frozen in terror. But it wasn't just his face. It was the way the mask had made me feel. That sickening mix of exhilaration and power. It thrilled and horrified me in equal measure, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. I tried everything to remove it. I clawed at the straps until my fingers bled, but they held fast like they were fused to my skin. I even considered cutting it off, but the moment I picked up the scissors, a sharp pain shot through my skull, blinding me with agony until I dropped them. The mask wasn't just stuck, it was alive, and it was in control. The next day, I didn't leave my room. My parents knocked on the door, asked if I was okay, but I couldn't let them see me like this. What would they say if they saw the mask? What if it made me do something to them? I stayed hidden, hoping the mask would weaken, that I could find a way to pry it off when its grip loosened. But it didn't. If anything, it grew stronger. By the time night fell, I was desperate. I couldn't sit still, couldn't stop pacing. The mask was whispering to me now, not just in my head, but aloud, like a voice just beneath the surface of my consciousness. It told me things, dark, twisted things. It whispered about power, about how I could have anything I wanted, be anyone I wanted. All I had to do was give in. I refused to listen, but the mask wouldn't stop. It filled my mind with images of violence, of bloodshed. My hands itched with the need to act, to follow its commands. And the more I resisted, the more the mask tightened, like it was punishing me for disobedience. It wasn't long before the itching turned into something worse. I felt a deep gnawing hunger, a craving that I couldn't satisfy no matter how much I ate or drank. It wasn't food or water I needed. It was something else, something darker. That's when the mask began to direct me. My feet moved on their own, carrying me out of the house, down the street, and into the night. I tried to fight it, but my body was no longer mine. I was a puppet, and the mask was pulling the strings. The streets were eerily quiet, the occasional sound of laughter and music from Halloween parties drifting through the air. I kept to the shadows, avoiding anyone who might see me. The mask's voice was louder now, urging me on, filling my head with a frenzy of thoughts I couldn't control. I found myself standing outside another house, much like the one I'd been in the night before. This one was larger, more upscale, with a well-manicured lawn and a row of expensive cars in the driveway. The lights inside were bright, and I could see people moving around, laughing, enjoying the night. They were happy, carefree, and the mask hated them for it. It drove me toward the back of the house, to a glass door that opened into a large, well-lit kitchen. Inside, a group of teenagers was gathered, talking, oblivious to the danger just outside. I could feel the mask's hunger growing, feeding off their energy, their joy. It wanted to take that from them, to destroy it. I tried to stop myself, but my hand moved to the door handle, pushing it open silently. None of them noticed as I stepped inside, the mask tightening its grip on my mind. I was shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't stop. The mask wouldn't let me. I picked up a knife from the counter, the cold steel comforting in my hand. It felt right, like it belonged there. The mask whispered in my ear, telling me what to do, how to move, where to strike. I could feel the pulse of its excitement, its anticipation. Then one of the teens turned around and saw me. He froze, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of the mask, the knife. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the air, suspended in time. Then he screamed, a sound that cut through the night like a knife. It was the trigger the mask had been waiting for. I lunged forward, the knife flashing in the light, and the first scream was cut short. Blood sprayed across the kitchen, staining the pristine white walls. The others reacted, trying to flee, but the mask was in full control now. It guided my every move, each swing of the blade, each thrust with precision and purpose. The room became a slaughterhouse. The sound of screams, of bodies hitting the floor filled the air. But it wasn't just the sound. It was the feeling, the rush of power that surged through me with every life I took. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. When it was over, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by the bodies of those I had once considered my peers. The mask was silent now, its hunger sated, at least for the moment. But I knew this wasn't the end. The mask wasn't done with me. It wouldn't stop until it had finished what it started. The aftermath of that night haunted me, though not in the way I expected. The memories of what I'd done were clear. Every scream, every drop of blood. But the guilt I thought I'd feel was smothered by something darker, something that the mask nurtured inside me. It was like a shadow had taken root in my mind, blocking out any light that might have shown me the way back to who I used to be. I didn't bother trying to remove the mask anymore. It had become part of me, its cold surface now a second skin that I could feel pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I wasn't sure where the mask ended and I began, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The mask gave me strength, a sense of invincibility that I had never known. I could walk the streets without fear, knowing that no one could touch me. But the mask's power came at a price. As the days passed, I noticed something changing within me. My thoughts grew darker, more twisted. I would catch myself staring at people for too long, imagining the ways I could hurt them, the ways I could make them scream. It wasn't just a passing thought anymore. It was a craving, one that the mask fed with every beat of my heart. And then there were the nightmares. Every night I would relive the moments of the killings, but they were different now, more vivid, more brutal. In the dreams, I wasn't just killing, I was reveling in it, laughing as I tore through flesh and bone. I could feel the mask's pleasure in the back of my mind, a sickening sense of satisfaction that lingered even after I woke up. I tried to stay away from people, afraid of what the mask would make me do, but it was relentless, pushing me to go out, to find new victims. It was always whispering, urging me to give in, to let go. The more I fought it, the stronger it became, until it was all I could hear. One night, I found myself back at the thrift store where it all began. The place was closed, the windows dark, but I felt drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. I needed answers, needed to know what the mask was, why it had chosen me. But when I tried the door, it was locked. I pounded on it, hoping someone would hear, but the place was silent. Then from behind me I heard a voice. "You're not the first, you know." I turned to see an old man standing in the shadows, his face partially hidden by the brim of his hat. His voice was rough, like gravel, and there was something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice sounding strange even to me. "The mask," he said, stepping closer. "It's cursed. It's been passed down from one poor soul to the next for centuries, feeding off their fear, their anger. It's a parasite, and once it latches on, it doesn't let go until it's had its fill." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've seen it before," he replied. "I've seen what it does to people, how it twists them, consumes them, and I've seen how it ends." "Ends?" I echoed, a knot forming in my stomach. "You can't escape it," he said, his voice low. "The mask will keep pushing you, driving you to do worse and worse things until there's nothing left of you. And when it's done with you, it'll find someone else." His words hung in the air, thick with a sense of finality that I couldn't ignore. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that I could beat it. But deep down, I knew he was right. The mask had already taken so much from me. My innocence, my sanity. It wouldn't stop until it had everything. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The old man looked at me with a pitying expression. "There's only one way to be free of it," he said, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a small, ornate dagger. "You have to destroy it. Destroy yourself." My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the dagger, its blade glinting in the dim light. "You want me to kill myself?" "It's the only way," he said, pressing the dagger into my hand. "The mask is bound to you. As long as you're alive, it will never stop. But if you die, the mask dies with you. It's the only way to break the curse." I stared at the dagger, my mind racing. Could I really do it? Could I end my own life just to stop the mask? The thought terrified me, but the alternative was even worse. I didn't want to become a monster. I didn't want to hurt anyone else. But the mask wouldn't let me go so easily. The old man turned to leave, but before he did, he spoke one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But it's the only way." He disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with the dagger in my hand. I looked down at it, my grip tightening on the hilt. The mask pulsed against my skin, as if sensing what I was about to do. It whispered to me, trying to soothe me, to convince me that I didn't have to go through with it. But I knew better. Taking a deep breath, I raised the dagger, the blade glinting ominously in the darkness. I closed my eyes, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I could feel the mask tightening, its panic seeping into my mind. It was afraid of losing its hold on me, afraid of dying. I pressed the tip of the blade against my chest, right where my heart was. I could feel my pulse, quick and erratic beneath the metal. The mask was screaming now, its voice a cacophony of rage and fear. But I ignored it, focusing only on the task at hand. I would end this. I would be free. But just as I was about to plunge the dagger into my heart, something stopped me. It wasn't the mask. It was something else. Something deep within me that recoiled at the thought of ending it all. It was as if a small, stubborn part of me still wanted to live, still believed there was another way. And in that moment of hesitation, the mask seized control. My hand jerked away from my chest, the dagger clattering to the ground. I gasped, the sudden loss of control leaving me reeling. The mask was in full control now, its grip on my mind tighter than ever before. I tried to fight it, but it was too strong, too determined to survive. And then, in a voice that was both mine and not mine, the mask spoke. "You think you can escape me?" It hissed, the words dripping with malice. "You are mine now, forever." I screamed, a sound of pure despair as the mask's power washed over me, consuming every last shred of resistance. I could feel it taking over, twisting my thoughts, my emotions, until there was nothing left but darkness. The mask had won. Darkness enveloped me as the mask tightened its grip, the last vestiges of my will slipping away. I was ready to surrender, to give in to the overwhelming power that had consumed me. But somewhere deep within the darkness, a small flickering light refused to be extinguished. It was the part of me that still clung to hope, that believed in the possibility of redemption. In that moment, a thought pierced through the mask's oppressive influence, a memory buried deep in my mind. I recalled something the old man had said, something that had stuck with me despite the mask's efforts to bury it. The mask is bound to you. As long as you're alive, it will never stop. But if you die, the mask dies with you. It wasn't the idea of ending my life that resonated with me now. It was the understanding that the mask's power came from me, from my fear, my anger, my willingness to let it take control. It fed off my darkest emotions, twisting them to suit its purpose. But if I could find the strength to resist, to reject the mask's influence, maybe, just maybe, I could break free without having to destroy myself. The mask hissed in my ear, sensing my resolve. But I didn't let it sway me this time. I focused on that small, flickering light within me, willing it to grow stronger, brighter. I thought of all the things I had to live for, the people I cared about, the future I still wanted to build. I wasn't alone, and I didn't have to face this darkness by myself. With every ounce of strength I had left, I fought back against the mask's control. It was like pushing through a wall of thick, suffocating fog, but I refused to give in. The mask screamed in rage, tightening its hold, but I pushed harder, clawing my way back to the surface. I could feel it beginning to weaken, its power waning as my determination grew. And then, with a sudden violent jolt, the mask cracked. The sound echoed in my mind like a thunderclap, and for a moment, everything went still. The mask trembled, its once unbreakable surface now riddled with fractures. I could feel it panicking, its hold on me slipping as the cracks spread, spiderwebbing across its entire form. The light within me flared brighter, burning away the last of the darkness. With one final surge of strength, I tore at the mask, ripping it from my face. It came away with a shuddering gasp, the porcelain surface splintering into pieces as it hit the ground. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The weight of the mask finally lifted. I stood there for a moment, staring at the shattered remains of the mask on the ground. The power that had once coursed through me, the dark, intoxicating energy, was gone. All that remained was the silence of the night and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. I was free. Tears filled my eyes as the reality of it hit me. I had done it. I had beaten the mask, not by destroying myself, but by finding the strength within to resist its influence. The darkness that had threatened to consume me was gone, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. I glanced up at the sky, the stars twinkling overhead, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The horrors I had endured, the lives I had taken, those memories would never leave me. But I knew now that I could move forward, that I could rebuild, that I could make amends. As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. The shattered pieces of the mask on the ground had begun to disintegrate, turning to dust and blowing away in the gentle breeze. The mask, its power broken, was vanishing, leaving no trace of its existence behind. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill my lungs. I was still me, still the person I had always been. But I was also someone new, someone stronger, wiser, and determined never to let the darkness take hold again. As I walked away from the thrift store, I felt a sense of hope for the future. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew that I could face it, whatever it might be. The mask had tried to destroy me, but in the end it had only made me stronger, and for the first time in a long time I smiled. The night was still young, and the world was waiting. I had a life to live, a future to create, and I wasn't going to let anything, especially a cursed mask, take that away from me. The mask was gone, its dark purpose unfulfilled, and I was free to be who I was always meant to be. The darkness had lost, and the light within me had won.